Well, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello. Betty Junod. I am the Vice President of Product Marketing here at VMware, looking after the Modern Apps and Management group.
And you've got a nice background, as we'll get into in working in the tech world, I have myself for quite some time. And we were talking about, I had run into some people from John Deere. Where was I? In DevOps Days, Des Moines, of course. Where else would you run into them? Just traipsing around. And they had an impressive presentation about their, I want to say like 3 or 4 year, like at least introducing Agile to the way that they were doing software. I think they're cool, and they say Deere, right, instead of John Deere, but over there at John Deere. And and then I found out that they were working on some IT revolution stuff that you knew about. They asked, this is the only time this has ever happened where, you currently, and in the past, I used to work at Dell, you work at big companies, you tell people you work somewhere and they're like, do you know this one person out of 100,000 people? And you're like,
No, normally no.
But for once he asked if I knew you, and I was like, I know her. This is the first time that's happened. It's very exciting.
And you wouldn't have thought that would happen in Iowa, of all places.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot going on in Iowa, apparently. But so we were just talking about the John Deere stuff, and then you brought up a topic that's I was just talking with someone about this earlier today, which is it seems like it's, I don't know, maybe it's talked about enough but not listened to enough. Is that the parent in me coming through? But just the idea of, like, especially in our area of, like, we're interested in people doing better at software, whether they're building it or running it. And we work with large organizations, and boy, they seem ambitious. They tend to have like really big plans about, like, the way that I jokingly always put it is like, they're going to migrate 80% of their applications by next year, just from a complete standstill. But that doesn't seem wise. And so,
and everyone's been saying that every year. So we're kind of like, how many percentages of apps are there now? Like,
exactly. Yeah. I always think it'd be great to, I don't know if you saw, but there was Benedict Evans put together a fun chart of, like, let's go to the Goldman Sachs CIO surveys for the past 10 years and see what percentage of applications CIOs are going to move to the cloud each year. And I think it's pretty much, it's always like, yep, we're going to move like 30% by next year for the last however many years. But,
and are we there yet? I don't, not in all cases. Yeah,
exactly.
Funny enough, Coté, is that, let's see, 3 years ago, my first forum IT revolution paper that I worked on was called "No App Left Behind," and it was about the how you can get 100% move to the cloud. But as part of the paper, we said, don't be dogmatic about it.
Yeah, the secret is time.
Yeah, time. Yeah. Infinite time, yes.
It's like reality's proprietary technology that you can rely on. And then you brought up the point of in this discussion we were having is that people bring up a lot in a good way, is like, it's good to start small. Like, start with one doesn't want to scale back their expectations of awesomeness, but you do want to match to reality. And so that's with my lengthy setup there. That's the first thing is, like, I mean, I talk about starting small all the time, person I was talking to earlier today, and so forth. But, like, it does seem like, how do you sort of explain what small is to, especially like these organizations who are like, I've come in here as executive whatnot, and my mission is to transform everything. Like, how do you kind of like scope down to like a good smallness?
Yeah. And what's funny is, like, we've seen this pattern repeat over and over and over again every time there's kind of a new technology thing, right? New abstraction layer, new tooling come out. And I think it's, there's within what we are doing today within this kind of like software development space, it's kind of like you start with a application or a type of application pattern, a workload type, and kind of solve for that. And then that being, kind of how you scope small. Like, I hear you. I feel like many leaders sometimes will see small as a negative, right? Like maybe they're not aiming high enough. But I heard I remember talking to a platform leader at a pretty innovative retail company saying, what they did is they focused on a specific use case, and that use case needed to address, it was like the use case is a pattern that addressed a certain type of applications, and there was enough of them in the organization. So you start to see patterns. And then you group things, into like buckets of like, and then that's the small, in that it's, I guess instead of like small from a size, it's more small in like a focus.
Right. Like a slice of things.
Yeah. Like very like, I want to solve for this type of thing. And then once I've done that, then I go to the next thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good version of small, right? Like in that, especially if like when I talk about people with doing things in a small way, it seems like one of the primary reasons to do it is like, and this is another, I always like to put things in these jokey terms, but like, it's also like, well, you kind of don't know what you're doing. So it's good to try it out a little bit at first. And, or you want to have a learning approach to it, right? Where you're kind of like figuring things out as you go along. And it is like with the idea of like, whether it's picking like one or two, just like projects or applications, or like, there's also an idea of, what did they used to call it in Scrum? Like a spike. Like some kind of thing, like a slice that goes all the way down from some angle, so you can test out like what happens at like the UI layer, and then like the kind of ops layer, something that allows you to test all these different things to kind of learn by going through it that way.
Because it's like you can never plan for all the permeations, deviations, or whatever in like the dependencies until you go through the exercise once. Maybe a non-tech example is before you bake like a 7-tier wedding cake for like a massive celebrity wedding, maybe you can try a birthday cake for baking a birthday cake for your kids. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. Is that from personal experience from your celebrity cake catering company?
No, I've never done the celebrity cake catering, but it's like we've got to build on our skills, right? Before you can, do calculus, you got to like learn algebra and learn addition, like get your tables done. So I think that applies in our tech stuff too. Like you don't know what's missing if you're going to try something wholly new until you kind of try it out in a smaller scale, like a defined, focused scale.
Yeah, kind of like some boundaries, a sandbox, as they used to say. And now like you've been in like a executive role for a while, and like, so that's like, the other angle of like digital transformation or just getting better at software is like actually changing the way people work and what the organization looks like. And like, so I mean, we've been around at VMware together for long enough that like you've seen through several like organizational changes, right? And like here and at other places. And so like when it comes to like managing how you change the work process around, like, is it also helpful to start small, or like what, regardless of what you end up having to do, what do you think the ideal way of going about it is?
Yeah, because like, as we know, the changing the way people do things is like, that's the hardest part. I mean, the whole agile, like when we talk about agile and DevOps, well, as an example, there's a bazillion tools out there that do these things, but it's the way people work, right? And it's the process, the interaction between humans, the processes, that's the biggest thing. And, if we look at VMware, there's been a lot of evolution we've done within the team, right? And instead of wholly saying like, hey, everybody in the team, we're going to do this other thing starting tomorrow, and we will all do it this way. Forget how you've been doing everything for, months or years, and how you've talked to, your teammate on XYZ. It is also, even in that sense, it makes sense to say, pick a project or pick here's a new project, a new launch, or a new whatever.
Yeah.
And say like, with this, we now have an opportunity to try it this other way. let's implement a different system. Let's do our collaboration differently. Let's, do our planning and actual execution on that project in a new way to define a new way to work together. And then you take that and say like, now let's try that on the next thing or an existing project, right? That's, like evolutions like that, they don't happen, they don't happen overnight. They can't.
Right. You can't just go into the factory and install new machines overnight and then plug them in and have things running. As nice as that would be for some things. But so as you're saying, like you kind of move on to the next one. And like, how do you like, whether you're talking with people, you do a lot of work with, as you were saying, these papers with IT Revolution and stuff, and you work on several of the groups there. What do they call them? Not think tanks or think groups, or working groups, or what's the name of like the little clusters of people?
They're called what's called the DevOps Enterprise Forum. And so those happen separately in a separate cycle. And typically it's people who've spoken at the summit events, which is where like, John Deere and, like Fannie Mae, other US bank folks have come and spoken about either a challenge they have or their transformation. Then they often champion the paper on that topic. And then the forum meets. Forum will meet once a year, and then we have like a multi-day workshop. And it's like you have working groups at each, like there's teams that write these papers. So it's a mix of folks in the industry. It's been a really professionally rewarding experience, because one year the team I was on had like someone from, it's like 3 different vendors, right? And we were all, outside of that room, we were all like competitors. So we had 3 vendors and like 2 or 3 like end user companies, and we were all sitting writing something that has like shared value to the industry, like, and we're not sitting there selling our products, but just kind of bringing our collective knowledge together. So that's kind of a unique and interesting experience.
Yeah, exactly. Like I looked through the platform paper that you worked on. I think it was purely about platform marketing, if I remember, or just
Last year was the developer platform, and it was not about the tech part. There was another team that worked on the how to like set up from a technical capabilities perspective, like define it. Ours was like just beyond the technology, how do you make sure it actually works?
Yeah. And getting people to use it, right? Like that's the conversation I have with platform teams the most is like there's one from about a year ago that the one I always remember in my head is there's like a room full of people at a big organization, infrastructure people. And as always, there was also the mainframe person who was genuinely delightful, because every time some question came up, the mainframe person would be like, yeah, it works. And, in my domain. And again, like the conversation we had it happens over and over again, which is the infrastructure people had said, we stood up the Kubernetes cluster and we can't get these developers to use it. Like no one's using it. So you're telling us like all this cloud native stuff is great and we give it to the developers and they don't seem to care. So what's up with that? But that paper kind of goes over that ongoing problem of the, I think we even have that now, whatever's milder than a cliche, a common saying of like, build it and they won't come, or like, you can't assume that you just release it.
Yep.
And so like, I was asking that because, you get to, when you work in those working groups and, also just people that you talk with, like one of the things I'm always curious to hear stories of is, as you were saying, like, or as we've been saying, you kind of start small and then you duplicate it in another team. And part of that process is also like, as we keep saying, kind of like learning what works and doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And like, what's like, what does that look like between the teams, right? Like, is it just like, I don't know, let's document what didn't work and then tell them not to do that? or like, do you actually kind of like engineer in experiments to test out ideas, or is it more just like seeing what happens? And this is almost like, it's some variation of like doing lean startup-y think for just like how you're programming an organization, so to speak. But it seems like it could be a lot more squishy when it comes to things you can't compile to people.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I feel like from that prior paper to like this one, they're kind of connected because this year we wrote about business value. So it's like, if you do something like this, how do you define what is big or small, meaningful enough, right? And then how do you experiment and test and prove that it's working? And then how do you then report back what is value? Because everybody's concerned about ROI, right? So
yes,
that was an interesting discussion. But if I look back at the companies, like the technology leaders we talked to, like end users, people who we at VMware are trying to sell our stuff to, right? And looked at asked them about what worked well, what didn't work well if they look back at their experience. The interesting thing about, I think, the idea of starting small, back to it's not small from size, it's just focus. Focus defines the experiment, and it helps you understand when things from that experiment, when things work or don't work, they're controlled. You're able to understand what those you have controlled variables, right? So one platform leader was talking about how they set up a new platform, and then they didn't get it was Kubernetes based, but nobody was using it. So immediately they were driven by, we just spent a ton of money on this thing and no one's using it. Well, it's only defined for this small scope of app, like only brand new cloud native microservices app. Okay, so what I want you to do is now be able to support legacy apps and COTS and all this stuff. And then before they even understood if this could be successful for the apps the target, they then Frankenstein the solution to do more. Now,
right.
Now this platform has no focus. And you're trying to, in many ways, it's like you're trying to address all from the beginning, and then they were able to address none.
Right. Yeah.
Focus. Then you can say I want to, focus, and aligning that focus with what you actually have in your portfolio. Because the big thing that person learned was they built this 12-factor app type of platform and realized, we have nothing that's suitable for that in our org.
Right. Yeah.
Whoopsies. Yeah.
Yeah. And that gets to that, it seems like with those initial projects, you do need the kind of minimal viable product, but it's something, it's more like what you were saying is, I mean, it's ridiculous when you say it out loud, but you need applications that work on the platform you just built that actually that actually fit to that. And I think, I mean, you were going over, I was in the beginning, preamble, they're saying people tend to have too big of a scope of what they want to do. Right. And you were just providing an example of that happening kind of not midway through, but right after the initial success, where you're sort of oh, this worked. Now let's do everything. Right. We've done minimal validation, to use the minimal word again, which it's almost a variation of the same thing. Is you've got to kind of what you're saying is you need to figure out, well, how the business value of the outcome of being successful, but also at some point you have to judge, now we can take on more, we can widen the focus or the scope, to use another word.
And this goes back to the whole idea of IT turning into platform as product, right? IT needs to run themselves like a business. So to that end, you should totally have a big audacious goal of here's my vision, like you're saying, the big one, I'm going to solve it all. You've got a new CIO, this is amazing. We're going to do all this stuff. But day one needs to that might be a multi-year roadmap. And then they need to say we will start here first because it's aligned to this line of business, this population. They have these needs, they have these problems. So we will do these 10 applications as an example. It could be some existing apps, we're going to solve some problem, or hey, we have a new business, new product we have to get out. Great. We'll use that as our target. Then you can say what they have to do is define what are some improvements we want to make in our business or tech as part of this, so that you have how do you know it was to your question on how do we know that we've done it?
That we did a good job.
That we did a good job. We have some ROI. We feel good that we've met our success criteria to then say, are there any more apps like this? Are there any more teams that fit this pattern? Then you have like a good, sales pitch to, onboard more people. And then you can say like, okay, we've exhausted all of the ones that fit in this kind of type. Now let's go see like, can this platform fit, or can what we do fit other, what's the next type of team, type of app?
Right.
It seems silly when we say it out loud because like, well, you should have like a very measured process. Like, you set some goals, you say you're going to address some challenges, you hit these milestones, then you go to the next phase and the next phase. It seems a little pedantic for us to say that out loud, but it's amazing how distracted we all can get in this industry because there's always a new shiny thing that eats up the mental space of everyone.
I've realized over the past year or so, as I've talked with some people that we've hired from industry, like our Tanzu value advisors, and now they help large organizations we work with, and it's fun to like see them change over to, let's see, normally if you work at a large organization, let me try to get this right, you're basically one to many towards like, the outside world and vendors and cloud providers. But then they totally reorient that where they're like one to many, but it's many different organizations they talk with. And so they get to see lots of peers there. And one of the things that we talk about frequently is that you have to not train yourself, but you have to be aware that like it's totally good to say commonsensical things because most people kind of, as you're saying, like they at least know it, but then they just don't really like always practice it, right? Like it's hard. And, it's fun when I don't know if you have done or do this, but it's kind of fun when you're speaking to a large group of people, like giving a talk, and you have these little, you can have these little probing jokes that you make. Like, one of them is sort of like, hey, who sits down at their stand-up meeting? Like, do you actually do this? And like, you can see the little chuckles and like eye rolls and stuff. And you get this anecdotal sense of like, yes, common sense is often the most uncommon one to go over, which, I think is fair. And, it is like as a slight variation of that, like you were talking about, working on like the like value creation or business value, kind of figuring that out. Right. And I think there's a tying up, like, did you follow all the developer productivity metric nerd fighting over the past month or so? It was fantastic. There was this article that came out where McKinsey was they were adding 4 ways of judging developer productivity.
Oh, goodness.
And the wide range of, like engineering people got very upset about it. And rightly so. Well, more or less rightly so. It was kind of like the argument about bimodal IT way back when, if you remember that.
Remember that?
Yeah. That one was great because I always figured the people who didn't like bimodal IT, they probably hadn't spent $5,000 to read the Gartner papers on it, but that's fine. Anyways, to cut myself off here instead of rambling on and on to hear myself talk, like what these new metrics are trying to pinpoint was like trying to come up with a way to show the value that developers were bringing based on the activities that they're doing, right? And which is like, that's what's been going on, right? Like, but it does get to this thing of like, what we would like, the ideal state is like if you have it, and whether it's developers or operations people, but you're judging based on the output, like whatever the outcome or the value is. But then that gets exactly to what I'm guessing the working group struggles with is like, yes, good luck measuring that, right? Like, how do you like? It's almost this ongoing problem of like, how close can you get to like, last week the development team was responsible for this revenue, right? Like, and it's hard to tie those things together. So you come up with this web of causality. But I don't know, like what is that group going to solve our problems? What's being worked on there?
The paper's just published, I want to say like maybe 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
What interesting in our discussions was a lot of talk around, the gap between what you're going to say in a boardroom or where you're reporting into like your C-suite, right? Those impact of the different functional teams to like what maybe an engineering manager is actually measuring. Because the gap is broad, like, yes. Yep, but what do you say? Like, oh, wow, our development team in this one application, which is basically one line of business, we have like a gazillion commits.
Exactly. Right.
But you're like, what if, but we've seen this. We've seen like, when we look at like open source repos or like all these other things, like we know that those things can be gamed. We know that doesn't always mean quality. We know that so like one of the big discussion areas within our working group was around like DORA, BSSH, all these things are great, but they're not like the end all be all. They're all indicators, but they maybe just that by itself, like that metrics falls flat because it's always balanced against something else. Lots of rate of change compared against stability, right? Lots of components, but against quality. Like you have to kind of measure those two together. And then it's also, like I've talked to some other industry leaders in the past of like, that's great. We're making a lot of change, but it's not a high revenue generating app. It's a very mature app. Does it need a lot of change?
Right.
We need more change on this new thing we're trying to get out that's in a more highly competitive space. So it's so nuanced. So in talking about delivery value, there's a bit of, hey, line of business. There's things that we care about at the highest level, right? Whether it might be like revenue growth or market share or having like customers like, buy like a new like complementary product, whatever those highest
Sure.
levels. And to do that, what does that mean technology has to do to make that happen? So I think the biggest thing that came out was like, be a little more specific. So then you can walk that back to like the actual like product and engineering teams. Cause then if you say, one of the examples we had was a travel hospitality, travel vendor type of, customer where they're like, we want to grow, direct revenue because they were getting most of their revenue share was actually coming from like third-party travel sites versus their own properties.
Right.
They're like, I want to increase my margins. Great. That's a sizable thing. And then say like, in order to increase my margins, what we need to do is have people buying from our direct sites versus the Travelocity, something like that, where they have to pay a royalty. And so then they said, okay, in order to do that, what do we need? Realizing, oh, wow, our website is basically unusable. We have no, we don't have a way for customers to buy direct. Great. So now then that backs up and be like, we need a website that can do these things. We need a call center that can do these things. We need a mobile app that does these things. Then that becomes like, well, how quickly can we get that out there? Like, what are the technology things we need to do? And then they can measure like a customer. Then from once it's out, they can start to measure like customer experience. How many abandoned shopping carts do we have? Or what's the time from like, I don't know, visit to purchase? The little things like that could then be that's very like engineering and product centric, but then we know we've already drawn a line on how that is connected to some of the higher level business concerns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a well, it hits upon the common sense thing of like, well, if you want to sell more directly, you should make sure you have direct sales enablement.
Yeah.
as you were joking about, but it is like, that is like I have this hopeful theory that a lot of the issues that we talk about in like connecting your software to the business and all of this area of value stuff at some point will become a little easier because you'll get like a generation of like all the way up to the board of people who are just like, yeah, I know how software works, right? Like, of course. The software team is important and what they're doing is important because that's how people buy travel stuff. So like they should do that, right? Like we don't need to necessarily needle about the costs and like which team did this value and did that. It's just sort of like as long as the business is doing well, it's fine. Which, and you want to have those indicators of like health and like that things are not, at that point, it seems like it's just a matter of knowing that you're not like wasting sort of effort, that you're kind of hiding in the big balloon of success, and so that you can help people out as needed. But it does seem like we're not quite yet at that point where people who are not in IT like really understand across the board that like, well, yeah, software is extremely valuable, so we should do that. And like, we don't need these complicated spreadsheets of causality about whether it works or not. Like, I use the app and I can see it improving. Done. I mean, not that it's necessarily that simple, but something along those lines.
The one question that came up, which is interesting, is it makes it's much more clear to everyone when you're starting a big new project. Like,
right.
We don't have the ability to purchase online. We should definitely do that. That makes a ton of sense. Right. And so then there's probably that initial investment of like, oh, we need to get all these things done in order to make this happen, make a new mobile app, make a new backend, like to be able to process all this data. The question came up is like, once that's going and there's a run rate, continuing to justify investment.
Right.
Where things got squirrely, which was interesting.
Yeah.
That was a question that came up in some of the discussions with the working group. Like, how do you continue to talk about value? Because that one-time investment makes a lot of sense for that initial transformation. But what if it's the assumption from non-technical folks is that, well, once it's there and it's fine, I can just start we can reduce the costs.
Right.
And that's not always the case. So that was an interesting thought on like, it's continually figuring out, because your value metrics change.
Yeah.
More to like over time.
Yeah. And well, is this true? I bet a lot of the financial planning actually does account for, I mean, they got that fancy word, amortization. Finance people love that word. But, there's the idea of exactly what you're saying is representing just the finances of something over time based on what you want to do with it. But that does, like you're saying, we talk with a lot of people who have gigantic existing portfolios that they want to live with or not live with, that they want to modernize or not. And it might just be impossible to kind of think about and quantify like the value of, let's just call it like agility, like because it's I always dislike analogies outside of software about software because we should just talk about software. But for lack of a better one, it's sort of like we kind of understand that you need to pay like for maintenance on a road because it's going to fall apart. So like you do that, but then like the idea of like, but this software works. So why do I have to pay people to sit around and do nothing? Right? Like what, what kind of like, why is it important that this thing that I don't think I'm ever going to need to change, that I could change it in the future? Right? Like having that agility to it. And of course, the punchline is like, well, you're probably always going to want to change it. That's why you're talking with us about wanting to modernize your applications. Right? Like, and so that's, I mean, like you're saying, that's that area of, for lack of a better phrase, quantification that it's really hard to figure out what to do about that because it's important in software. Otherwise, you're stuck.
Yeah, and it's something that you have to keep because it's not like you can just, I'll just hire some people when we need to make a change. It's not that, right? There has to be a steady state of it, and it also gets more that gets a little like at least with the actual application, the application maps to a line of business. It's a little more clear. It gets a little squirrelier at platforms because there's now because that will only continue to grow as it takes on more apps, and then it's also like a shared service. So how do you? And we all know how well chargeback generally works, right?
Right. Yeah.
Mostly doesn't, I think.
Yeah. No, the analogy, or not analogy, this anecdote I always think about chargebacks is like, he works with us now, Tony McCauley, who worked at the Home Depot a while back, and he had a great story about they had what we call the Tanzu application service, or Cloud Foundry back then, and they'd installed it, and they had these initial teams that we were talking about, and then all of a sudden they were looking at like usage, consumption, as we would say, and it flattened out for several months, and then they were like, "What's going wrong?" This kind of pulls together a lot of the things, we've been saying kind of jokingly, is like, we're spending all this money to have this platform to be awesome, and no one's using it. But then they found out, to the chargeback point, that like people didn't want to use it because they didn't want to do the chargebacks. And there was this like, which is, it is hilarious, because like at a certain level, you understand that chargebacks are just like not real. Like, I mean, things have to get paid for and done, but like more or less, it's sort of just like the same money moving around in some interesting way. Anyways, so this was their flash of insight, was they were like, what if we didn't charge people?
Yeah.
Right? Because like we're already spending the money and we want them to use it. So maybe we should just make it easy. And then sure enough, usage went up. But it is like, and I think like things like that make a lot of sense to me, because at the platform level, it kind of is a big agility thing, right? Like it's hard to say just on its own, you can see the payoff for a platform. It's like, well, you have to do something with it. And until you actually get more and more applications on it, there's really nothing to measure. You can measure its efficiency, the uptime it provides for things, but like really you need to have an application to have it have any value. So you should make that as easy
100%.
as possible.
Yeah, because it's also, the platform is a living, breathing thing in many ways, right? You get it up and running, and then you'll continue to add stuff to it, add more services, technology, what have you, as you bring on more applications. And it needs to be, again, like the road, it has to be maintained. Can't drive cars on it. If it's not continuously maintained or updated.
So here's maybe like the last thing, as I was thinking of things to talk about with you, and I think it's really like, like it's always good to talk with someone who's kind of not only has their own ideas like you, but they have a conduit to all sorts of other people, right? Like whether it's people we talk with kind of in our VMware capacity, or in the enterprise forum capacity, and that is like, I have this theory that we in the tech, is this true? I've only ever like lived professionally in the tech world, basically. And like, I think in the tech world, we get very excited about change and urgency, and we're always like chasing doing something new. Like that's our thing, basically. It's what our, I wouldn't say it's our product, but it's our
motto.
Yeah.
It's our industry motto.
It's, exactly. Like it's the ethos, the principles. It's that thing above strategy, even vision, right? Like,
yeah.
But like, and so I've been thinking recently, like, we've got to like be careful about how much of this urgency we let like drip outside of our crazy world. Right. And this started coming up again when I was talking with the John Deere people, is like, what I found really impressive about their story is a lot of the things we've talked about, like clearly, I would imagine like definitely at the C-suite level and probably at the board for the kind of changes they would need to do it. Someone had that thing I was joking about earlier where they're like, oh, software, that's really important. Let's do it. And like, that allowed them to actually think about how software was part of the product that they were building and a vital part of it. Anyways, but it took them a long time. And so I wonder with these people, all these people that you talk with, like myself, like how you think about calibrating that urgency, and kind of like, do they actually need more urgency or less, or like how do you kind of push that button as needed?
Yeah. I mean, from a business side, there should always be urgency, because, it's amazing today how quickly things can spike or decline, right? Every like company, every product is at the mercy of, the social media whims at these days, right? That said, technology adoption, there's, you and I see this. It's like shiny new object, like a million shiny new objects every day. What's going to stick? What's not going to stick? And some of those require pretty dramatic, technical, like architectural changes, as well as like process and other changes and knowledge changes inside of a company. So, with that, it's kind of they should evaluate. There should be an urgency from understanding and evaluating, but they should really measure it to like what they have today. They really need to like level set. It's like the guy who did like, I want this 12-factor beautiful platform. I saw like PC Roku, and I'm like, I wanted that, and realized nothing in their environment could do it. Having a really solid, realistic understanding of like, what do I have? Like actually applications. So then what are my application dependencies? To use that as like a filter of all these shiny new things. What are the things that could be actually useful? Because maybe something's wrong if you have like high IO intensive apps or what have you.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like there's a couple of different like sliders for calibrating. Here I am using analogies to other things instead of the thing itself.
We can build a little interactive like thing.
Exactly. And like, I mean, I like the one you've identified, which is like, would this shiny new thing benefit you? Like it might be cool and fun and even a best practice, but if you don't need it, then you're going to spend a lot of effort on it. But there's another one that I think you're making me think of, is that also there is a mixture of like timeline and risk. Whereas us in the tech industry, like, I mean, we in our lore, we have a book with the kind of like grim title, "Only the Paranoid Survive," is part of our like.
We live in Tomorrowland, right?
Exactly. Like part of our canon is that like whatever happened yesterday is old, right? Like, and so we're willing to put up with a lot of risk to like do something new. Whereas I think the timeline for most organizations is like, yeah, that's not a problem, right?
Yeah.
Like we're in manufacturing or banking or whatever. So like we have time. So there's no need to like take a huge risk and like run around like doing things like that, which I think is, that's good to put in the spreadsheet there.
They've been around some of those companies have been around for 150 years. They're not trying to mess up like those insurance companies that have been around for 100 plus years. We as consumers really don't want them to mess that up either.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a joke I've been using recently when I talk with a group of people, is I'm like, I know you want me to talk about AI, so here's what I'm going to say. It's great. I mess around with it. You should use it. It'll be fantastic. But if you're my bank, don't do it.
If you're my doctor, maybe not. Yeah.
If you're not my bank, you should do it and then report back to my bank of how it went, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think it's again, like, measured. Yes, I mean, it's exciting living in Tomorrowland, but the getting to tomorrow sometimes takes years.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I appreciate you giving me the chance just to ask a bunch of loosely related questions.
It's fun.
Good. Yeah, it's always good to nice to get some new, as they say, perspectives and just anecdotes and things like that. I'm a firm believer in what is it that data is the plural of anecdote, so I can go update some charts now and good stuff like that. Well, I mean, you've mentioned several things you work on, but if people are interested in just finding out more about you in a non-creepy way, see things that you've been working on, like what would you point them at?
Oh, you know what? I have them all either on Twitter or actually probably LinkedIn. I have like some of these books, papers, articles for VMware and also outside of VMware, from my days at Docker and whatnot. Those are all there.
Nicely. Yeah. LinkedIn's they need to make like a little web page interface. I bet they talk about that all the time. Yeah. Instead of just that like pinned post or something, they need like they should buy that company that people use for Instagram, like Linktree or something. The Lincoln. It's like if you go into Instagram, like, and you can only like now you can put like 3, but you can put one URL. And so what people do is there's some services you go to and you can kind of automate posting things in there. So you can always you can post your Instagram picture and you'll say like, click the link in bio And then there'll be like the last 50 things you were trying to like, get people to look at.
Okay.
And so like that, anyways, it's just a good
Well,
index.
look, I look forward to clicking on your profile to hear
Exactly.
a lot of products you're shilling, Coté.
Yes. Shill tree. Exactly.
Tree.
That's what we could call.
You're an influencer. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, great. Well, if you've if whether you've watched this, the video of it or listened to it online, it's been another fun Tanzu Talk conversation. I'll put some links to some of those things. If Shill tree exists, I'll try to look that up. That would be great.
I think we have an idea for you, sir.
Exactly. But as always, you can go to tanzutalk.com and look up the show notes for this. And as I always like to advise, the next time you get a hold of someone's phone or computer, just open up their podcast app and subscribe them to Tanzu Talk. They maybe not thank you later, but I will for getting new listeners for us.
Like and subscribe. Thanks.
Exactly. All right. And with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.